206.5%. That is not a typo. That is not a glitch in the matrix. That is the effective, combined tariff rate a Chinese electric vehicle now faces if it tries to cross the border into the United States. Honestly, when I first saw that number on the terminal, I thought my spreadsheet was broken. But it is real. While BYD just crushed global records in 2025, selling 4.6 million cars and officially overtaking Tesla as the world's pure electric volume leader, there is one massive, glaring blank spot on their expansion map: the United States of America. Washington has built a wall. And I am not talking about concrete or steel slats here. I am talking about a fortress of tax code. Section 301 tariffs, the new so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, and strict origin rules have created a barrier designed to be mathematically impossible to breach. But here's the thing. While everyone in the media is watching the ports, waiting for BYD car carriers that will never arrive, my analysis suggests BYD is already inside the fortress. They didn't come in with tires and steering wheels. They came in with something far more dangerous to legacy auto: standards, patents, and engineering blueprints. Today, we are decoding the 206% dilemma. We are going to look at why the US market has become a forbidden zone, and why BYD's secret roadmap might just make those tariffs irrelevant. To understand why you cannot buy a $10,000 BYD Seagull in California, we first need to look at the anatomy of this trade war. It is not just about protectionism, it is about survival. Let's break down the math, because the devil is truly in the details. As of January 2026, the tariff stack is absolutely brutal. You start with the standard auto import duty of 2.5%. That is the baseline. Then, you add the Section 301 penalty, which the Biden administration quadrupled to 100%. But strictly following the new administration's Reciprocal Trade Act, there is now an additional surcharge of 84%. And finally, there is the specific 20% sanctioned tariff related to fentanyl disputes. When you stack all of this up, 2.5 plus 100 plus 84 plus 20, you hit that magic number, 206.5%. Let's put that into real-world terms. A $35,000 BYD Han EV, which is a flagship sedan comparable to a Tesla Model S, would cost over $100,000 by the time it sits on a dealer lot in Miami. And that is before the dealer markup. At that price point, the car is dead on arrival. It is commercially impossible. And honestly, that is exactly the point. The policy is working as intended. It is designed to buy time for Ford, GM, and Stellantis to catch up. But here's the kicker. The data suggests that instead of catching up, the gap is actually widening. Now, high taxes are one thing. You can technically pay a tax if your margins are high enough. But the real killer isn't the price. It is the supply chain ban. This is what I call the triple lock. The updated regulations in the Inflation Reduction Act and the new OBBB legislation have created a legal minefield. Lock number 1, equity penetration. If a Chinese entity, defined as a foreign entity of concern, or FEOC, holds more than 25% control of a battery plant, that battery is radioactive to the US market. No subsidies, no tax credits. Lock number 2, the tech lockout. If you use Chinese mineral processing for your lithium or graphite, which by the way represents 90% of the global supply, you are disqualified. Lock number 3, contract control. This is the new one. Even licensing deals are now under the microscope. If BYD tries to simply license their battery tech to a US company, regulators can now block it if they determine it creates technological dependency. It was designed to suffocate the Chinese battery supply chain. But here's the irony. The US energy storage market is currently 80% dependent on Chinese lithium batteries. By trying to cut off the head of the dragon, the US might have inadvertently cut off its own power supply. So, naturally, everyone points to the map and says, what about Mexico? It seems like the obvious move, right? BYD has already invested heavily in a massive plant in Nuevo León, with a capacity of 150,000 units, under the USMCA trade agreement. If you build it in Mexico, it should technically enter the US duty-free. But looking at the data, this backdoor is effectively a mirage. It is a trap. The localization requirement is now 75%. That means BYD cannot just ship parts from Shenzhen and assemble them in Mexico, like a Lego set. They have to build the battery cells, the motors, and the chassis, literally on North American soil. And the political pressure is intense. US senators are currently pushing legislation that would apply a 70% tariff even on Mexican-made Chinese cars. They are calling it the origin loophole closer. My analysis suggests BYD knows this perfectly well. They aren't building that factory in Mexico to invade Texas. They are building it to conquer Brazil, Colombia, and the rest of Latin America. They are using Mexico as a hub for the global south, not as a backdoor to the north. They have essentially written off the US market for direct sales. So, if they can't ship cars and they can't easily build in Mexico, what is the play? How do you monetize the world's largest consumer economy without selling them a single product? The report points to a strategy that Western media rarely discusses. I call it the Intel Inside pivot. Think about it. BYD holds critical foundational patents on LFP blade batteries and the DMI hybrid powertrain. These technologies are verified, they are incredibly cheap, and most importantly, they are safe. Meanwhile, US automakers like Ford and GM are struggling. They are bleeding cash on every EV they sell. They need cost reduction, and they need it yesterday. Instead of fighting for market share, BYD is positioning itself to sell the solution to its competitors. We are seeing early signs of this with the CATL and Ford arrangement in Michigan. Even though the politicians shouted about it, the deal went through because Ford needed the tech. BYD is likely preparing to license their platform architecture. You can tax a car with a VIN number. It is very, very hard to tax an engineering blueprint or a patent license fee without hurting your own domestic industry. By exporting the standard rather than the product, they bypass the tariffs entirely. This brings us to the invisible war. The war that isn't fought on dealer lots, but in conference rooms in Geneva and Detroit. I have been tracking the committee assignments in SAE International and the ISO standards bodies. And here is what I found. Chinese engineers are increasingly the ones holding the pen. When you set the standard for charging protocols, for battery safety testing, for vehicle-to-grid communication, you own the ecosystem. BYD is aggressively pushing their standards to become the global default. If the entire world adopts a charging standard or a battery form factor that BYD optimized, American companies will have to engineer their products to match Chinese specifications just to sell cars in Europe or Southeast Asia. The US might be an island, but it is a shrinking island in terms of influence. If BYD controls the source code of the EV revolution, tariffs become irrelevant. It creates a situation where US automakers are paying royalties to Shenzhen just to stay competitive globally. But let's step away from the geopolitics for a second and talk about you, the consumer. What does this 26% wall actually mean for the average American driver? It means you are paying a protection tax. In China, a BYD Seagull sells for roughly $10,000 US. It has decent range, a high-tech interior, and it is safe. In the US, the cheapest electric vehicle you can buy is nearly 3 times that price, and honestly, with inferior software. By blocking these cars, the US is effectively protecting mediocrity. Without the pressure of fierce competition from the Seagull or the Yuan Plus, domestic automakers have no incentive to lower prices aggressively. They can keep selling $40,000 crossovers because there is no $10,000 alternative to shame them. The US consumer is being shielded from affordable green technology. It is a paradox. The government wants you to drive electric, but they are banning the only affordable electric cars in existence. And the scary part? We are only talking about today's lithium technology. The gap is about to get wider. While BYD navigates these political walls with their current tech, their R&D labs in Shenzhen are already preparing the next wave. Solid-state batteries. The tariffs are designed to stop today's LFP batteries. But what happens when the industry shifts to sulfide solid-state? This technology changes the supply chain game completely. It requires different materials, different processing, and different patents. BYD is aggressively patenting in this space. If you want to see the technical specs and the manufacturing timeline that creates the next barrier to entry, you need to read my latest deep dive. It is called the BYD Solid-State Battery Report 2026. It breaks down the raw engineering data that explains why tariffs might be fighting the last war, not the next one. You can download the executive summary for free, or get the full supply chain dataset via the link in the description. In evolutionary biology, there is a concept called the Galapagos effect. When an ecosystem is isolated from the rest of the world, it evolves in a weird, unique direction. In my view, the US auto market is becoming the Galapagos of the automotive world. By locking BYD out, the US is protecting its domestic automakers, yes, but it is also isolating them from the fiercest competition on Earth. It is creating a protected garden where prices stay high and innovation slows down to a comfortable pace. In 2025, BYD secured 22% of the global market. They are winning in Europe, dominating Southeast Asia, and conquering South America. They do not need the US market to survive. They are doing just fine without it. However, the US market might need BYD's technology to actually achieve its green energy goals. The longer this wall stands, the wider the technology gap becomes. BYD is evolving from a car manufacturer into a global standard setter. And historically, the one who sets the standard eventually wins the market, tariffs or not. I will be tracking their next move in the SAE standard committees. That is where the real war is being fought. Subscribe to master the world's fastest moving tech market before your competitors do.